That document also talks about the signs of renewal that we want to see, where ministry enables the church to be outward facing and where it is relational, missional, collaborative, adaptive and diverse. And the vision for lay ministries draws out those areas and what they might mean for lay ministers in particular. For example, exploring the challenge of hierarchy within and between different ministries, lay and ordained, and encouraging people to be co-labourers for the kingdom. Also a lot in there, as you'd expect, about encouraging and resourcing the whole people of God and maintaining a dynamic focus on the transformation of church and world around missional. Just a brief note on vocabulary in this context. Within the Church of England, there are lots of different interpretations of lots of different things, and the word ministry is certainly one of those. So within this context, in the context of my role and this vision, what we're talking about with ministry might be described as those roles that are public, representative in some ways, people who have been called to particular public ministries and commissioned for specific responsibilities. This isn't in any way to imply that vocations to public ministry are of any greater importance or status or even holiness than vocations that might be described as relational or social. All are called to be part of the ministry of the church as it serves God's mission. But what we're talking about in the context of this session is those kind of public commissioned roles. And we broadly divided those into three categories. They might overlap a bit, they're not perfect, but it just helps us to frame what we're talking about to some extent. So we might talk about authorised or commissioned lay ministries, for example, dioceses which commission pastoral ministries. Might also talk about locally recognised lay ministry, which of course is the vast majority of lay ministry, as people in parishes and worshipping communities, for example, welcomers, people leading prayers, intercessions, any number of different roles. And then there are licensed lay ministers. We have around, 8,000, I feel like I should know this off the top of my head, licensed lay ministers, for example, readers and LLMs. Back to the vision for lay ministries. So here's the top line of what we hope to see. We want to see lay ministries thriving in a church that has confidence in lay ministries and celebrates the abundance of those in lay ministries. The vision looks forward to a church where lay ministries abound and flourish fruitfully as part of the ecosystem of the whole people of God, enabling the ministry of the whole church as it serves God's mission in God's world. And within that vision, we use the metaphor of a garden for lay ministries in the Church of England. If they are like a garden, it's one of extraordinary abundance, with a multitude of plants of different varieties. In different areas of the garden, across all your different dioceses, across different parishes, things may look a little different to each other. The varying conditions enable a range of plants to flourish, and indeed need different plants to make the best of the conditions that they have. There are some plants which crop up in all the areas, and some might be unique to a particular type of soil, but the overall variety is a vital part of it. We think there's something really important about recognising and giving thanks for the great gift of this beautiful garden in its scale and its diversity. To recognise those plants that can often be hidden from view, as well as giving thanks for the whole of it. However, it is not a garden that exists for admiration for its own sake, wonderful though the plants within it may be. It's a garden that exists to bear fruit, giving thanks to the one who provides the sun and the water essential to its growth. Within the vision, we explore what might be needed for this garden to flourish even more fully and bear fruit in greater abundance. And there's something there around careful nurturing, about spotting new shoots of vocation and supporting them, about caring for different plants and knowing what they need to thrive. It also requires a knowledge of what blights the plants and protecting them from it. It might even, we might say, require some careful pruning to make sure that growth is healthy and that there's space for new and different plants to emerge. And all of this requires those caring for the garden, those in leadership roles, to be wise, sharing their knowledge and learning with each other. A question for you to ponder perhaps later on is what lay ministries are flourishing in your diocese? Which ministries may need some extra tending? And what might be needed to support those? This is a picture of my genuine allotment, which I inherited last summer. So although the metaphor of a garden owes a debt of thanks to Mandy Ford, who is Dean of Bristol, you'll see that gardening and horticulture is very much on my mind. This was the condition in which we inherited the allotment because the previous allotment holders were incredibly skilled, and it's flourishing beautifully. We're still harvesting things that they'd planted before we took possession of it last August. And so I've been nosing around all the other plots on the allotment site, as you can imagine. And there are some of them that have completely rewilded. So there is lots of growth on them, but they certainly aren't fruitful. They're just full of weeds that spread to other people's allotment and drive people mad. So there is something for me in this allotment about the balance of freedom and creativity with good stewardship. And both of those things are required for fruitfulness and flourishing, I think, of a healthy allotment. We'll see how right I get it in the next few years. But I was reflecting for those of us in leadership roles, thinking of how we're good stewards of the space that we're in, if that space is something of a ministry patch. And part of my role is to support people from across the diocese to have these conversations about how we're stewarding our different areas across different dioceses and in different roles. As part of that, we had a discussion, as it happens this week, about collaborative ministry and thinking around that, and lots of conversations about enabling of everyday faith and missionary discipleship. Adrian mentioned some of the things that I hope to do, so here are some of the things coming up. Talked about sharing the vision and positive narrative, and it's always really great to have stories from different dioceses. So if you have really good news stories about lay ministries in your diocese, I would love to hear them, so we can look at whether we can share those through our national channels to raise the profile and celebrate lay ministries. We have recently updated discernment and formation frameworks for readers and LLM readers. And as Adrian mentioned, very much within those, thinking about how these ministers are enabling of others in their ministry. And we're doing some work exploring simplifying the canons for licensing lay ministers. And we're also doing some work exploring funding for training of licensed lay ministers. And that's the point at which I'm going to hand back over to Bishop Martin.
Thank you, Carrie. And I personally am very excited about the vision, the idea of the garden and the flourishing of lay ministries. And I think it's important to say, actually, it's not just a vision in the sense of, just something in somebody's mind that we can portray with nice pictures and so on. This is happening. Lay ministry is flourishing in the Church of England. And it's one of those things we kind of just don't notice, really. It kind of happens without General Synod passing lots of motions, without bishops sort of setting out great strategies. It's just bubbled up within the Church of England. And so we found that the variety of lay ministries has increased enormously in recent years. So a recent survey that Carrie was involved with, along with some other staff from Church House, identified huge numbers. I won't sort of name the numbers because we weren't entirely sure, but of the different names being used now in dioceses for different lay ministries. We are talking very large numbers, But with that comes the complexity of the fact that every diocese is doing it slightly differently. Now, part of me rejoices in that and says, great, we want to, as the phrase goes, let 1,000 flowers bloom. But we've then started to come up against some slight challenges, shall we say. Somebody exercising a flourishing ministry in one diocese then moves house and ends up living in another diocese, where actually their ministry is not recognised in the same way. What happens then? Or we come up against a situation where churches quite rightly want to encourage people to try out preaching and to try out leading services or involved in all sorts of different ministries. But when do we hit the point where actually they need some training? When do we hit the point when actually we need to be sure that proper safeguarding checks have been done? There are all sorts of questions you start to get into where actually letting 1,000 flowers bloom, great as it sounds, becomes a bit of a challenge, particularly for us as an institution. So that's a bit what we want to explore with you, I think, in conversation. Carrie briefly mentioned that we have got a piece of work running at the moment, commissioned by the House of Bishops, to not only simplify the lay ministry canons, so potentially to take the 4 lay ministry canons, which there currently are, 2 about readers, 2 about lay workers, and combine them into one canon, so to simplify it. I won't go into the detail of how we might do that, but that's what we're exploring at the moment. But House of Bishops also asked us to, alongside that, articulate then a new framework for lay ministry. Now, this is not in any sense to do away with reader ministry at all. I want to state that very, very clearly. But it is to acknowledge this flourishing of a whole variety of different lay ministries. Now, we've started some work on that. But again, fairly quickly, of course, you run into some challenges around, so the 3 categories that Carrie outlined earlier in terms of licensed, authorized, and locally recognized ministry. Looks very neat, and that's what a lot of dioceses are doing. But you start to get into a slightly tricky question, particularly around that authorized category, as we've gone through it. Again, it's this question of when does safeguarding kick in? When do we actually have to be sure that somebody exercising this authorized ministry on behalf of the church has been properly trained in safeguarding, properly checked, and so on? There are various other bits within that as well, and I won't go into all the details, but suffice to say that even in that piece of work, of course, we're coming up against this thing again of, is this again the national church trying to impose a particular structure on dioceses who are currently all doing their own thing? So somewhere we're trying to find this pathway, if you like, between encouraging the growth of lay ministries, the bubbling up from the ground, if you like, while having some sort of framework in which to hold it all across the different dioceses, across the national church. I think I'm going to stop at that point because we very much want to get to you in your groups just thinking about this a little bit as well. And I think actually, Carrie, I'm going to go straight on to the RMF work actually and probably get people talking in groups, and then you can come back to us and any questions on anything we've said as well. So RMF, Resourcing Ministerial Formation. This is a big piece of work going on nationally at the moment, being led by Martin Seeley and Bishop Chester as well. Various different strands of it, so I'm not going to go into all the detail of the different strands, but essentially to do with formation, training for clergy and also for lay ministers. So one strand within all the work is around lay ministry, and for the first time, as far as I'm aware, in the history of the Church of England, there is the possibility that the national church is going to put funding into lay ministry formation and training. That's quite a big win, I have to say, for those of us who've been working on this for a little while, because up till now, the narrative I've continually had as I've gone cap in hand to say, could we have just a little bit of money for this, that, or the other, is no, there's no money for lay ministry. Basically, dioceses fund that, that's it. Well, we've managed to achieve just a little bit of change, and it looks like there is going to be some money there. We don't know exact amounts, and we are still working on ideas, so we very much wanted to consult you on this. And the question very simply is, if you were in my shoes or Carrie's shoes, and you were told you've got £1 million a year for lay ministry, how would you use it? Now, slight boundary around it, of course, is this is all under the heading, as I say, of resourcing ministerial formation. Now, that doesn't have to, of course, just be the model we have at the moment, which is all about training for 1, 2, 3 years at the beginning of your ministry, if you like, before you're licensed, and then you go on to other things. There's all sorts of possibilities of how it could be used over time. Of course, the place of theological education institutions within that, TEIs, is a critical question. Part of the reason for doing some of this work is because some of our TEIs are very much on the edge financially. So there is considerable pressure that whatever we do, some of this money should go to those TEIs. But how do we do that? How do we do that in a way that helps them, that helps dioceses in terms of what they're trying to see from lay ministers, that helps the lay ministers themselves, and ultimately helps us to grow the kingdom of God and to proclaim the gospel? So, with that, over to you. I think I just want to invite you to have a conversation around your tables. Maybe particular questions from what we said already that you want to pick up. We're keen to hear back sort of general feedback, as Carrie was mentioning, about what are you noticing in terms of lay ministries in your diocese, what's being recognised at the moment. But then this specific question, if you could make sure you get onto the specific question on resourcing ministerial formation, how would you use £1 million? Over to you, about sort of 20 minutes or so probably, just to chat in your groups. Okay. just another couple of minutes, and then we'll come back together. Okay, if I can be calling you back together. Carrie's back on the screen as well there, I see, that's good. So we're keen to hear back from you. General comments, questions, as well as hopefully you managed to get onto a specific question about the £1 million. £1 million for the whole church, by the way. Yes, I gather there was at least one group thought it might be per diocese. So I don't think so, sadly. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Yep. Great. So we're not going to do the sort of walk of death around all the different tables. So just go for it. Over here, then, if we could start over here. We'll need to use the microphone so Carrie can hear.
So we looked at. I made the mistake of saying important. No, this isn't important. So we've just looked at very short training, and longer training.
Yep.
Thinking there are some people who do fantastic work who get no training. So perhaps spending some money putting a half-day, very short training course on for coffee people and welcomers, to read scripture, to be on the intercession rota, for the choir on the theology of music.
Yeah.
But a half a day, not as a barrier to doing those things, people will start doing them, but to recognise them as important lay ministries, which actually make a huge difference to worship. And that actually these are people worthy of training. Then you've got the shorter training, and then the idea there is to devise modular training, so that if you've done half a dozen modules, you might have the modules on worship leader or pastoral care or preaching or whatever it is, that would allow you to do that one thing. But I understand in Oxford you can then aggregate those and buy a big chunk off your lay reader sentence. So that would be a really good idea, because lots of people, in York it's 4 years training to be a reader, whereas if you've done half a dozen of these modules, you might be able to reduce that. And anyway, that was some thoughts from us.
Great, thank you very much. And I mean, I certainly like the idea about broadening the scope. So yes, including choir members, coffee rota people. Maybe even bell ringers. Who knows? That would be an interesting one, wouldn't it? But yeah, I think offering ways in for people to get involved, I think, is good. And the modular thing, I mean, is interesting. The evidence we have at the moment is that actually generally take up for continuing ministerial developments is actually very poor in almost all dioceses. So we are very much working with the model at the moment of front-loading all the training and people then not participating in training after that. So for me, that's a culture shift that we need to bring about as to how do we get into the mindset, the fact that we need the ongoing development and training. So thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you. One of the things which we see as being very important is to have lay and ordained ministers working in partnership.
Absolutely, yes.
And so we, certainly in Lincoln Diocese, we see it as essential that we train them together, so that it's instilled in people right from the very outset. And also to leverage, and we're fortunate in having our own TEI, as you'll be aware, but to make better use of that, to extend the use so that we're training or offering training for all varieties of ministry within the diocese.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And you're not on your own in that at all. So Emmanuel College, which is the new college for the Northwest, similar. They've very deliberately said it's going to be ordained and lay together, and they're working with that. Of course, it's not true of all TEIs. Some of the TEIs, of course, are very different in the sense of they do have lots of lay people training, but often not actually Anglican. For a number of them, obviously, they take independent students and so on. Yeah, it's a principle that I would certainly support, but quite how we'd get all TEIs in place, I don't know. So, thank you. And I will say, Carrie, do jump in at any point on this. Sorry, yes, we want to make sure you're included. Anybody else? Yep. That's all right. No, as I say, we'll...
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think another thing that we mentioned in our group was, you know, definitely the importance of partnership. And I know in our diocese we've tried a lot with things like Thrive and Flex, you know, getting, you know, clergy and laity working together. But again, it's more courses. And I think in terms of this £1 million that we might have, it's not always courses. You know, it's at what point courses are necessary. And we wondered if there might be a possibility that we could support people in terms of chaplaincy and outreach by having networks and hubs so that they can support each other. And we talked about the importance of training young people and including them. So you had peer chaplaincies and maybe training for young people. That was something else we thought was really important.
Very interesting, and yes, certainly, I mean, we're still at the stage of sort of early discussions around this, and one of the themes that has come through, interestingly already, is chaplaincy. That actually currently, although there are courses out there to train chaplains and so on, it's not a requirement. Actually, you can get a job as a chaplain in a hospital or a prison without necessarily having any form of training. So that's something we'd like to explore more, and of course. We will be looking in some way to align the use of the money in some way with the National Vision and Strategy, which of course talks a lot about younger and more diverse across the board. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Hold it up here.
Hi, Julie Withers from Chester. Good job it's divided across all the dioceses. I was being very frugal. Initially thinking about vocations, days and weekends, space for people to begin to dream what they would do for God if there were no barriers. Only because it was a similar experience that set me off on my own vocation. And I found it so helpful. Just to be dreaming dreams for God. So those could obviously local events, quite cheap to run, I guess. But mostly I wondered about our own Foundations for Ministry course in Chester has provided so many readers and pastoral workers, licensed lay ministers. But also it encourages people in whatever they're doing. Part of the course content includes teaching on everyday ministry. So we even had somebody leave the course because they'd found their vocation as an accountant working for the Methodist Church and also for the PCC as treasurer. And he was overjoyed. Having his vocation affirmed. So he didn't need to do the accreditation and complete the journey. He was affirmed in what he was doing. But I wondered about resourcing the ministerial formation. And I think we had a conversation about that, didn't we? Video packages and online training, it's fabulous stuff. But I'm not convinced that it helps in formation. So I just wonder about how that can be developed. And Foundations for Ministry that we've been running, we've found the small group work really fosters growing confidence in fellowship, in faith, and in vocation. So more opportunities for that, really.
Thank you. That really, really helpful. And yeah, I mean, all three of those ideas I think I like very much. I mean, yes, the formation piece, absolutely. It happens in community. There is no substitute for community. So yes, there's the training you can do online and so on, but there has to be some sort of expression of community for genuine formation to take place, I believe. I love the idea about space for people to dream dreams and imagine what their ministry might be in the future. And I think within that, just linking to your other point, one of the things that does slightly concern me, and I know I need to be careful how I say this slightly, we've certainly found this in Leicester, and I don't know whether others have as well, that we get a number of people who come forward for lay ministry, and they start the lay ministry course, and then suddenly discover actually they would quite like to be ordained. And then move on to ordination. Now, in one sense, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great if that's, a genuine vocation they discern. But I would actually quite love to see more people doing the lay ministry course saying, you know what, actually, my vocation is to be an accountant or to, whatever it may be. And to really feel affirmed in that wider sense of vocation rather than always having it narrowed to church ministry.
The Foundations for Ministry that we operate I described it as not being the sausage factory. So people don't go onto it just to be licensed. People come onto it from a wide variety of contexts, just wanting to know more, wanting to grow more. And in coming on the course, they find out for themselves discernment is part of the process. So they realize where their ministry is, or they realize what they were doing is the ministry they're called to.
Great.
So it's
good.
not just specific for licensed ministry. It's across the board.
Great. No, that's good. Good to hear that. Let's just have a couple more comments, and then I'm going to hand back to Carrie for some closing comments, because I'm quite conscious we are to finish at past, I think, aren't we? So presumably so you can get a drink and whatever else you may be wanting, I don't know. Anyone else? Some final comments? Yeah.
Right, I'll get to use the mic now.
Yes, do.
On one of our National Junior Network briefings, we had the Strategic Operations Director from Network Rail, who now runs one of the largest evangelical free churches in the world. They've got branches all over the place now. And he talked about leadership and how you get young people or lay people involved. And he said from his experience, you don't go and ask them if they would like to have a go at doing so-and-so. We need some help with this or whatever. You ask them if they would just help with a small part, get them to taste it and see how it feels, and then say, well, would you like to have a little bit longer? Try another little bit more. And he said it works. Now, I coordinate a live stream broadcast for our church every Sunday. And I've actually put that into practice. And we had a head teacher from one of our church schools was interested in doing a little reading. She wouldn't do it live, but she said, I'll record it. So she recorded it. And one Sunday I said, I haven't got time to record it. Can you just do it live for me? So she did it live. She's now going forward for the ministry. She's been selected, and we're getting her to do some of the homilies as practice, and it's working.
Thank you. That's great. And absolutely, I would imagine if we went around the room, most of us would say, actually, yeah, the route into ministry has been those stepping stones. And yeah, gradually learning as we go along. So.
Somewhere over here.
Good. Who's going to speak from that table?
We were just talking about the money, because £1 million appeals to us. But then, as Robert said, £1 million divided by 42 dioceses really is not very much at all. And we'd have to make much better use of it than that. And there was a clear desire to actually spend the money getting TEIs to develop the courses we want in the diocese. And the thought was getting the diocese together to specify, we want this course on youth for leaders and this and this and this and this. That gets them buy-in from the diocese to actually take that up. And then let the TEIs bid, if they want, to actually produce those materials. And let's not try to do too many. Let's do 3 or 4 good courses rather than 7 or 8 or a dozen mediocre ones. And then that builds a resource that can be used more than 1 year. It can be used 2 or 3 years on. And you get the course that's wanted in the diocese with buy-in from them. Was that what we said?
That's great. Thank you for that. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. There's some evidence of that beginning to happen. I mean, again, Emmanuel in the Northwest, I think that's been one of the drivers behind the setting up of that college. Actually, for myself in the East Midlands, so we have St Mellitus East Midlands now. We've set up a hub from St Mellitus, but we were very clear in setting that up. And it's currently, I mean, the 3 core dioceses are Leicester, Southern Nottingham and Derby. And we were very clear in setting that up that we wanted to do precisely that actually we weren't asking St Mellitus to simply replicate what they were doing in London in the East Midlands, but that we had some specifics. So one example I would give of that is that we have a big programme in Leicester around what we call intercultural worshipping communities. So the idea of, I mean, Leicester's a very diverse place, as you probably know, but we're very clear that we don't want different cultures simply coexisting alongside each other. It's about actually how we deliberately generate opportunities to learn from different cultures. And so we were very clear with St Mellitus. We said we need to make sure that all our ministers are being trained in this sort of work, how to facilitate that sort of intercultural learning. And so there's some work going on that, and it's precisely that sort of thing. So you're right, though, we could use the money to leverage more of that. And I think the final thing I would just say, before I hand back to Carrie, as I say, for the final comments, I'm celebrating the fact that this is a win for us, a big win, I think, £1 million. But, I am going to say the but, of course that's compared with, I think, is it about 19 million we spend per year on ordained training? 1 million versus 19. It's a win, as I say, we've got 1 million, but I think something you could be doing, actually, as lay chairs, is to be raising the voice more around this. Because, as I say, it's been a big struggle to even get that amount of money. And I think if we are serious about a parity of ministries between lay and ordained, then actually our budget has to show that, I would argue. But anyway, I'll leave that with you to explore that further if you want to. But Carrie, yes, final comments from you.
Thanks very much. We've had a deep dive into a specific area of work, which has been really, really helpful. You've probably noticed that I've been scribbling ideas down on my pad. Do get in touch before Maundy Thursday with me if you've got other ideas that you'd like to feed in that you haven't had a chance. My email address is carrie.myers@churchofengland.org. With the chair's goodwill, I'll just go a couple of minutes over 8:30 because I just want to take us back a little bit to that big picture of the vision and give you a couple more areas that you might want to think about taking back to discuss in your diocese and to champion. Hopefully there'll be another slide coming up because there's text on it, but I'm sure we can send them round as well, so you don't need to scribble everything down. There are 4 areas that the vision hopes to see as it looks forward to a future where lay ministries flourish more fully. So the first of those is that we are a church where lay ministries are enabling of whole life discipleship of the whole people of God. So really keeping that vision front and centre and making that threaded through everything to do with lay ministries in terms of exploring vocation and formation, lifelong learning, as Bishop Martin's spoken about. The second area is hoping for a church where lay ministries are truly recognised and valued and celebrated as God-given, and where all ministers are confident in their calling as co-labourers in the kingdom of God, that we really challenge hierarchies where they emerge, and understand ministry as mutual and collaborative, rooted in God's call to all of us in our baptism. The third area is looking forward to a church where all those called into lay ministries are confident in exercising their gifts in ministry. So a lot of that is about support, formation, training, and lifelong learning, and a really positive culture around that. And we talked lots of ideas about how we might use that excellent £1 million to support that. But there'll be lots of other ways of making sure that people feel confident and well supported in their ministries as well. And fourthly, the vision looks forward to a church where those in lay ministries have opportunities to share learning so that confidence is built, innovations are shared, and inspiration is ignited. So we have a national network. There's people from all across the diocese who get together regularly and share ideas, and opportunities like this as well to share between different dioceses what's going on, what's going really well, what's challenging, and keeping our eyes open also to what's happening at the margins where God is so often to be found. And so I'm sad not to be able to be with you in person to earwig on all your conversations over this weekend. But as I say, do get in touch with me in the next couple of weeks. Do share your thoughts, your ideas, and any questions that you've had, which we haven't been able to pick up. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Carrie. And there's meant to be someone appointed to take over your role for a year. So
yes, we hope so.
The work will continue. Any final things you'd like us as lay chairs to take back to our diocese?
I think those 4 things are great areas to start with. If you had the chance to scribble them down, I'm sure slides will be shared and whatnot, if not. But yeah, just as champions really, and using your voice as lay leaders to kind of promote that vision for really confident lay ministries across the diocese.
Yeah. Okay. And so, yeah, role for lay chairs as champions of the development and expansion of lay ministries in the plural. It is an essential part of, quotes, the mixed ecology. And those of you who have a vote on General Synod, when it comes to vote 1 in July, make sure you're there to speak for this historic moment, if we get there. Okay, so thank you to Bishop Martin, who is staying overnight and will be presiding at Holy Communion tomorrow at 8 o'clock in here before breakfast. Okay, well, yes, before breakfast. I think breakfast. No, but you could have your breakfast first. It opens at 7. But we're here at 8. Okay, so that's the next port of call. We're going to close this evening with Compline, which will appear on the screen, and Chris is going to lead it. We will give you the mic. Okay.
the sound still coming through the white speakers? No. No, they're not. They're not coming through the white speakers. So we have less echo. All residents, free drinks at the bar, courtesy of Yarnfield.